we are discussing about a product backlog. So what is product backlog is all about? So why product backlog is used in application development in agile environment, I mean to say. Normally backlogs, as I stated earlier, will be of three different types. One is product backlog. Second, we call it as sprint backlog, followed by release backlog. Product backlog, nothing but wherever the user stories we are writing, like it's a repository to store all the user stories. That too on a prioritization mode, means whatever the user story you are going to develop, for that, whatever the kind of prioritization we are making to implement on the first level sprints and all everything will be under the product backlog. This is how a product backlog looks like. So I think you can see here now, right? So this is how generally a product backlog will be. Means, let's say we are starting one sprint. So whenever we are starting a sprint, usually what happens in this sprint, we have to take some user stories, like somewhere around 3 to 4 user stories will be taken and we do the development. So if you want to do the development of this user story, development should be taken place. What is that we needed? First of all, you have to prioritize the user stories on the existing sprint. This prioritization depends on different things. Normally, to prioritize the user stories, there will be two aspects will be taking into an account. One is about business value, second is complexity. So what business value this particular user story consists of, followed by how much complexity this user story is having, because complexity in terms of the implementation I'm talking about. Normally, this complexity, all that will be decided by the team members. Whoever are working under Scrum team, those people will decide what business value this particular user story is having, and followed by the complexity. So these are the factors we'll be taking into an account. By understanding this view in mind, usually product backlog is the one which will be used for few points. One is about it prioritizes the work which you are about to do. Means there is a sprint you have developed. Assume that we have keeping 4 user stories. Assume that there were 10 user stories at this point in time. Out of 10, we have taken 4. 4 user stories. On what basis? The basis is priority. So what is priority stands for? Prioritization, nothing but there is a technique for prioritization. That is what we call it as Moscow technique. Moscow technique means must, should, could, would. Means priorities will be divided into 4 different parts. Means must, which are very important. Should, which will be provide you an additional advantage for the feature or functionality to develop it. Could means which provide you value added services. Would means doesn't mean that future requirements, means which are optional, not required at this point in time, which may be used for the optional purpose in future. This is how usually the prioritization will be made in when we are prioritizing the work. Prioritizing the work, nothing but user stories, all that. Now, for that reason, usually product backlog is being used. Means whatever if you can see here, the diagram, you can see high priorities will be on the top position, wherein low priority will be kept under the least position. It means items, whatever the items means, items in terms of the user stories I'm talking about. Whichever the user stories are in high priority will be put on the first level. Whatever are in the intermediary and low level. This is how generally the structure of product backlog will be maintained. Now there is a product backlog refinement happens every time, because for example there were 10 user stories in this backlog, if you can see. Now top 4 we have taken in the first sprint. How many you have? 6 user stories. Now let us say that these 4 user stories are developing. Now customer is asking you to add some new user story, or customer wants to edit the existing one, right? So what normally we do, being a Scrum Master, we don't do any sort of changes in the existing sprint once the sprint has started. Remember, underline this point. In Scrum, as long as sprint is not started, you can do as many changes as you want. But once the sprint is started, you are not authorized to do any sort of changes because there is a goal which was decided for the sprint, which we call it a sprint goal. So this sprint goal will be decided. So once the sprint's goal decided, there is no deviation must be taken place. Hence, if there is any sort of changes expecting by the customer, usually we don't do that, right? So we'll be reluctant to do it. But there will be some situations where we have to compromise in some situations. For that time, what we do is whatever the user story customer is expecting us to add, with the consent of Scrum team, with the consent of the Scrum team and discussing with them, that we do it in the next sprint, means that we transfer to the next sprint. This is how generally the structure will be maintained. Means we put the same user story on the next sprint, right? This is how generally happens. So that sprint means you are planning that existing user story on the next sprint, not in the present one. So what happened, that user story again will be kept under product backlog. So out of 10, if you see 4 is completed, 6 is balanced. Now one more added. How many we have? 7. Again, there is a product backlog refinement happen. On that 7, what are high priority, right? What are intermediary and low priority? This is how generally the product backlog is being worked. So prioritization of work, for that purpose product backlog is being used. This is the first reason. The second reason is that product backlog will be used to plan the product development, means the whole product, because irrespective of the sprints, for example, we have taken first sprint wherein we have completed in 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, immediately you start the second sprint, right? Even in the second sprint, the same thing, even the same product backlog is being used for prioritization purpose there also. So whenever you are planning the product development, the whole product development in a larger context, product backlog is being used for that reason. Next, you want to specify the task, right? For example, there is a user story which is complex on its nature. Right, now I have given a user story for login page, right, to you. I asked you guys, means you are all belongs to the team of people. So I asked you guys to do the work, right? I asked you to do the product backlog, this thing, like I asked you guys to do the user story development. Based on the complexity, you felt that it is too heavy to do it, right, within the less time. So what we do now, usually user stories will be divided into task. What is the task here? If you take a login page is the functionality, assume that. Front page designing will be given for one person. Database designing and all everything will be given for others. Testing will be taken care of by others, and coding will be looking after by other people. So what we have done, the same user story divided into 4 different tasks. User story means user interface designs, testing, coding, as well as database designing. So whenever you have simplified task, what happened? Whatever the user story you want to develop, that you are categorized into 4 parts, so that you have given these 4 specific tasks to the team members, so that work can be completed very fast. So even for that also product backlog is being used for. Next, whatever the desired outcome we want to get, for that also product backlog is being used. At the same time, we can avoid the wasting. Why avoiding of waste of time and all happens? Because we are taking the high priority items in the beginning days itself. So there is no point of wasting time. So on what basis priority we are taking? Priority we are taking based on 2 factors. As I mentioned earlier, business value, second is complexity, right? So 2 factors. So it reduces the time of wastage, all that, so that we don't have any sort of confusion over. At the same time, we can complete the tasks and all everything without having any sort of difficulty. So this is what usually a product backlog is all about. This product backlog is not only for user stories, because most of the people have some misconception over that product backlog is being used for user story development, all that. But to some extent it is not right, but not to the full extent. Because product backlog consists of user stories. At the same time, we can include bugs and all that, right? Whatever the bugs we have identified. For example, coding was done. Once the coding was done, there is a testing was done by the team members, then where they have identified some bugs to be rectified, right? So they have identified some bugs which has to be troubleshooted in coming time. So for that reason, normally bugs is being used for. So user stories can be stored in product backlog. Bugs can be stored. Next, refactoring it means you have to refactor the items. Whatever the items, existing items you have to refactor it so that you are regrooming it, refactoring it, so that because whatever customer is expecting as high priority now may not be there after 10 days, isn't it? Right? May not be after 10 days, maybe his priority might be changed. That may be an intermediate or low priority, maybe depends on their requirements on it. So there is a constant product backlog grooming and all, everything happens in regular intervals, which has to be taken care of here. Next, knowledge acquisition, right? Whatever the knowledge are we gaining and all. So these are the aspects which comes under product backlog, which is something useful and essential when we are working on agile development. So whenever we have created epics and user stories, there is a product backlog, which I have explained in the agile planning part, because if you see in this agile planning, you can see here prior to this, in the first banner itself I have shown you, there is a product backlog where we have to create. This product backlog and all, everything will be created once the release plan, right? Whatever the release plans do we have and all, everything. So based on that, generally this whatever the priority items and all, everything will be taking into account, right? So this is what usually product backlog is being used for. Now we must be knowing about how this user stories will be developed and what basis usually we take. I'm going to explain you. Of course, I hope you understood about this agile planning process, which I have shown you on the banner. In order to make it more simplified, I'm just writing some highlighted points on the Word document so that it will be having more understanding level to you. Right? So it's a basic understanding where you can understand it much better. Just a second. I'll write down on this document so that you'll have an idea of this. Right. So what I said about that, right? So right now I'm going to write down here in detail so that you'll be understood better from the product backlog onwards. Means prioritized user stories will be kept in product backlog for before sprint planning. Okay, before sprint planning, because I told you the scrum ceremonies, all that in the earlier session, because there are sprint planning, daily scrum, review, retrospection, all that. This is how it looks like. So in the agile planning, if you see, once this agile release plan, everything is completed, the next is about sprint planning. Sprint planning we do. After that, we go for daily scrum, sprint review, retrospection. This is what generally scrum ceremony stands for. Remember again, these are the scrum ceremonies which are applicable for scrum framework. Why am I specifying this? You can ask me, right? So for what reason you're asking, you're saying it for a couple of times? Because in agile, as I stated earlier, it's not only scrum. There is a process called Kanban, which can be used. There is a process called XP, stands for extreme programming, which also can be used in agile development. But comparing to scrum, those are having less in terms of the percentage when in reference to the usage of that. So whatever the scrum ceremonies I'm talking about, like sprint planning, review, retrospection, daily scrum, review, retrospection, all that, all these scrum ceremonies are confined only to the scrum framework. Why? Because whenever if you can look into Kanban, means if you want to talk about the Kanban part, Kanban is a different structure altogether, right? You don't see anything like this sort. Kanban is something different where we have three different columns will be there. One is to do, planning, and to do and in progress and done. Directly tasks will be taken, right? Whatever the user stories we have, that we have simplified into task, and directly tasks will be taken and we do it. So there is no concept called sprint. There is no concept called sprint. But you must be having some confusion here. Raj, you have used most of the times about sprint. What is sprint is all about? Why sprint creation to be done, right? So this is what it. So the reason why I'm going to explain you on the Word document so that you'll be having more clarity on this. Now, what are we doing now? First of all, prioritizing user stories, which will be kept in the product backlog before going to sprint planning. Now, first of all, we must be knowing about few questions. What is sprint is all about? Right. First of all, we must be knowing about what is sprint, why sprint, why sprint planning required. Right. So we have to get answers for these questions first before we want to discuss about the sprint planning, right? What we do in sprint planning, as I stated, as I mentioned in the banner. If you see, I mentioned about sprint planning all that, isn't it? Right. So sprint planning, prioritizing the backlog, right? So this is what. So in this part, whatever the sprint planning on the 4-step, whatever I'm showing you, this detailed explanation I'm giving here. Okay. So understand the difference. So this is exclusively I'm talking about only sprint planning, nothing more than that. Right, I'm discussing only about sprint planning now. So daily scrum I'm not discussing, only sprint planning, how to do sprint planning, what aspects to be taken into account, all that. Now first of all, you must be knowing about, before you are going for sprint planning, first of all we must be knowing about what is sprint. Sprint nothing but a collection of user stories. In simple words to say, sprint is nothing but the collection of user stories. This is what we call it as sprint stands for. Now, as I stated, as I mentioned earlier, user story is nothing but the functionalities, non-functionalities, whatever you're supposed to develop will be called as user stories. These user stories will be kept under product backlog where prioritization will be made. So out of that prioritization, whatever is immediately required for us at this point in time, for example, out of 10, we have taken 4. So those 4 you have to put somewhere. There must be some sprint, like some, because this is a time box kind of thing. This is really considered and comes under the time box sprint. This is all time boxing this thing, which one, that sprint, all that, because sprint will be confined and sprint will be calculated based on weeks, like 2 weeks, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and so on. So what we do here is, first of all, we have to know about what is sprint. Sprint is nothing but collection of user stories, which is a time boxing one. Let's say, for example, these sprints will be of different types. Sometimes 2-week sprint, sometimes 3 weeks, and so on, right? 4-week sprint, like that, right? Weeks will be there. Now, why sprint is required? Why is sprint required? Because whatever the user stories are we developing should have some time boxing based on the immediate priority, right? Immediate priority. For example, out of 10, we want to develop 4 user stories first immediately. So where you keep all that? So for that reason, there is a point called sprint we create. In this sprint, all these 4 user stories will be kept, right? Now, on an average, if you see, normally, if you're talking about release planning and all, normally there will be around 3 to 5 sprints, all that, right? So that will be there. For example, if there is a three months of release planning we have. In this 3 months of release planning, how many sprints do we develop? For example, there were 40 user stories. All these 40 user stories, in how many sprints you are putting? Okay, for example, there were 40 user stories we have. In these 3 months, you have to complete 40 user stories, right? This is what the final, as of now, the plan is. In the first release, you have to complete 40 user stories. Are you going to develop all the 40 user stories at a time? No, right? You cannot develop all the 40 user stories at a time. What you are doing now, out of 40, to make it simplified, I'm saying this example. So because in real, there will be some slight variations, right? 40 user stories. In this 40 user stories, what we are doing now, we are taking limited user stories first, and we are creating sprint one, and we are putting all that in that. Now there is a time boxing. For every sprint, there will be a time boxing. Now this time boxing will be decided by the team members. Is it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and all that? Now there are 4 user stories we have to develop. So 4 user stories, on what basis you develop? For example, you are a developer. I am saying that these whatever the user stories we have and all everything, that user stories has to be developed on the priority basis. Right? That is what I said. Now, being a developer, if you want to develop the user story, what is the base for that? What is the base for that? Based on the business value and complexity, you will evaluate this user story taking this much of time, right or not? Normally in Agile, we don't take it directly onto hours. We have a concept called story points. First of all, story points will be given for the user stories. Means whatever the user stories we have, all the user stories will be having story points. For example, if there are 10 user stories, 10 user stories will be having some story points will give. Normally, to give the story points, there is a series called Fibonacci series. We use a series called Fibonacci series. Fibonacci series means 1, 2, 2 plus 1, 3, right? 3 plus 2 plus 3, 5, 5 plus 3, 8, 8 plus 5, 13, and so on. This is how generally Fibonacci series will be. Now, what we have to do is, whenever we are putting all this in the product backlog, if you see in this items here we have to write down the size. Size means we have to see what is the story point we have to give for this particular user story. This is what we call it as estimation. We have to do the estimation. On what basis are you doing this estimation? This estimation depends on different aspects. Means whatever the estimation you have in terms of the implementation of that particular user story might be different from me, because my perception level is entirely different than yours. Because you see complexity in some phases where I see complexity in some phases. But being into Agile environment, both are us working on the same Agile environment, on the same Scrum. There must be a commonality among all these people. Means what, either I have to come to your conclusion or you have to come to my conclusion, or there must be some common platform to come to a conclusion that is required. How do we do that? It is very simple for you to understand. For example, you are traveling, you and one more, two of your friends were traveling from one location to another location, right? In US, wherever it is, right? Now, to reach from one point to another destination, assume that there is 400 kilometers distance. You're traveling, there are two ways. One is you can go by air and you can go by road. There are two options. Now you guys, both of you friends have decided to go in a car, not on by air. You want to go in a car, you want to spend some time, and you have to go 400 hours of journey, you want to go by car. These two, you are using two different cars, right? Your transportation, everyone has their own individual transportation. Cars are different. So you started 400 kilometers is what the distance. So to complete in 400 kilometers, assume that there will be taken 8 to 9 hours will be the journey. So this is the average journey. If you see in Google, it is showing you 8 to 9 hours it will be. 9 hours is the journey time. This is what it was shown there. Now you want to start. Now you tell me, whatever the timeline, whatever the time you have taken might be different from your friend, or vice versa. Why? Because some people may be reaching to the destination point in 10 hours. Some people may be doing in, maybe reaching in 8 hours, and some may be taking more than that or less than that. But there will be some minimum cutoff time. 8 hours minimum time will be. Some people may be reaching in 8 hours, and some people may be reaching in 10 hours or 9 hours, whatever it is. Why it happened? Because it purely depends on the kind of car you have taken, pickup, expertise of driving, about the condition of the road, at the same time the stopping points which we have planned. For example, you are planning stopping points for the breakfast, lunch, all that. But whereas one of other friend of yours, he has not taken, they have not taken any breakfast point, all that, right? So they don't want, they have taken lunch, because both are you traveling separately, right? So whenever you are reaching, the amount of time you are taking will not be the same, right? It may be hour or hour, assume that 1 hour, right? 1 hour late, 1 hour ahead, right? So this is how it is. So on what basis it is? It's completely depends on the performance of that individual people who are traveling in a car. At the same time, the priorities. What is your priority? Your priority is to take at least 2 to 3 stops in between, so that you go comfortably, right? So you don't have any emergency, right? No rush, nothing. So this is what your planning is. But it will not be the same with other people, isn't it? The same way, whenever you are going to develop any kind of user stories in real environment, in reference to the sprint I'm talking about, whatever the stories you have, stories must be having some story points. This is what we have to give, story points. So there must be a commonality among story points which will be given by the team members. Normally story points will be decided by the team. Now you could ask me, Raj, on what basis usually we do? To do the story points, usually there is a point called story point techniques, right? Planning estimation techniques, we call it as. These estimation techniques will be of two types. One is poker planning, poker gaming and all that, poker game planning, all that. And second is t-shirt sizing. T-shirt sizing means you understood, right? T-shirt sizing means L, M, XL, double XL, something of that sort. This is what t-shirt sizing stands for. Poker planning. Poker planning means this is all completely based on 3C's technique. There is a technique called 3C's which will be followed by us. So what is 3C's technique? Card, conversation, and confirmation, right? So based on these 3 steps, story points will be decided. So if you are planning to complete a story, user story, yes, if you want to complete a sprint, 4.4 user stories sprint, if you want to complete, so prior to that, what is that required? First of all, you have to create story point for the user stories what you guys have created. You means as a product owner, I'm saying, not being a scrum master, right? So whatever the user stories we have created, so what we have to do, we have to give story points for that particular user story. That is something essentially important to understand. Now what we do here, whenever we have created user story, story points will be given on the series of Fibonacci series, as I mentioned, right? 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, etc. Right? So this is how generally the story points will be given. Now there must be a commonality among people who are working. So how it works in this poker planning, because normally most of the times we follow poker planning here. How poker planning works? Poker planning works will be very simple. Let's say there is a card, means the user story is on the card. Story. This story, the same card will be given to all the people who are in the team, right? So we give everyone to them this card. This is what you see stands for card. Card will be given for everyone. There will be the story which is there in the card. Where there will be next level is there will be a conversation among the team members, and we ask team members to provide number for each and every card. That must be on the Fibonacci series. Because why we have taken Fibonacci series and why are we not taking? It's on numbering basis, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So why are we not taking, right? This question you may get. The reason is Fibonacci series, why we are taking whatever the two numbers were there, these two, if you are adding, the third number will come, right? Means if you see this number 5, how you got this number? Because of the prior two numbers addition. So there is a constant increment which normally happen even in application development also. To resemble that, usually Fibonacci series is the one we'll be taking into an account. So the same card is being given to all the people. There is a conversation going on among, assume that there are 5 people, conversation going on with all these 5 people. Out of 5, for example, 3 people have given one, same number was given by 3 people, and 2 people have given other number, right? Again, what will happen? Again, the same card will be going in and around with these people again and again. Now, can you assure that, for example, you are the one who has given 2 number first in the first round? Where in the second round, can you give 2 number? Is it maybe? Sometimes you may be stick on to the same, or sometimes you may be giving number 3 or 5. Why? Because whatever the priority you felt is important at this point in time, after that you might be thinking in another way, wherein you have given 3 or 5 or 1, whatever it is. So the mindset and as well as the confirmation may not be the same. As long as there are conversation is happening, the ideas and as well as the expectations will be changed from one to another. So the major reason why are we going for poker planning is to get commonality among team members, and they have to give a single number for each and every user story. There must be a commonality, but practically you could ask me one thing, Raj, there are 5 people. How can you expect the commonality among these people? Poker planning is a technique which try to give a commonality. If there is no situation, for example, out of 5, there were 4 people were given on the same number, 1 people was not accepted, what happens, right? Normally, right? So because it's a human mentality, we have our own thinking process, we have our own style of thinking, right? Which never changes sometimes. But there must be a compromise here where we take majority into consideration. We take majority into consideration. Whoever is giving majority finally, I'm saying, not in the first level, finally, that number will be taken into confirmation. So this is a 3-card technique, 3 Cs technique: card, conversation, and confirmation. Card will be given to all the people. There will be a conversation going on the particular user story. Particular user story, what conversation happened? Conversation happened in terms of the technicalities. They'll be discussing about the user interface part, right? They may be discussing about the coding one, testing one, maybe database related stuff, maybe for a connectivity purpose. Right, they discuss about the technical difficulties, technical challenges and all, everything among the group, and finally they come to a conclusion. Once they come to a conclusion, that there will be a story point will be decided by the team members. For example, there are 4 points. For example, there are 4 user stories. You have given one story point maybe for one, and even maybe you may be giving 5 for other story points, like this, right? So there is nothing specific, right? You must be giving this story point, nothing like that. So what we do first, for example, if there are 4 user stories, first user story I'll show you in Jira, you will be understood much better, because once the theory completed, I'll show you in a practical manner so that you'll be understood much better, because I discussed this point, right? So there it will be easy for you to understand more better, right? On Jira I'll show you later, right? For example, one user story, you have given 1 story point. Second user story, you may be giving 3. Third user story, you may be given 5, right? Need not be increment. 4 user story, you may be giving 1, or you may be giving 2. Now, for example, in sprint 1, right, 4 user stories you have taken, right? Irrespective of the priority, based on the priority you have taken. How many story points we have? 2 plus 5, 7, 7 plus 3, 10, 10 plus 1, 11. In first story, you have to complete 11 story points in 2 weeks of time by the Scrum team. Whether are they can complete it, all the story points can they complete or not, that's a different thing. That's a different issue altogether. But prior to that, first of all, If you have created a sprint, if you have 4 user stories, as a simple I'm saying as an example, these 4 user stories will be given story points first. In the product backlog itself, we'll give you the story points based on the priority. So if you have calculated all the story points, there are 11. There is nothing assured where, see, the point is that in that first sprint, whatever the 2 weeks of time, these 11 story points has to be completed. This is the fundamental rule. But it's end of the day, we need to understand one thing, it's a human intervention, right? Human intervention. 100% there is no accuracy, right? 99.9%. 100% no accuracy, right? Because it's a human intervention, it may go wrong sometimes. So then velocity comes into picture. I'll discuss it about the velocity later, right? So 11 story points have given. Now team has to complete these 11 story points in 2 weeks of time. Now on what basis this will be calculated, right? So for example, 11 story points are there. We have 2 weeks of time. How they can calculate? Here normally Scrum Master comes into picture in sprint planning here. Because being a role of a Scrum Master, you will be doing this. Because you will be involving in sprint planning, you have to see. For example, if there is a sprint where we have 4 user stories, for all these 4 user stories, there are 11 story points which must be completed in 2 weeks. Now, what aspects will you consider into will be taking into consideration is the challenge here. So, what being a Scrum Master you're going to do, that I'm going to explain in tomorrow session. Is it clear to you? Suruchi?
Yeah.
Right. So what you're going to do here, because 11 story points for 4 user stories, 11 story points total, 2 weeks of time. Now, on what basis are you doing this? Right? What is the amount of calculation we do, and what we do here? Right? What is the thing you follow? What aspects to be taking into an account? Step procedures that I'll be explaining in tomorrow session.